The Ottoman Empire did not start with wealth, armies, or grand cities. It began with a small frontier group, fighting to stay alive beside collapsing Byzantine lands. One leader made choices that pulled his people out of obscurity and pushed them toward a future no one around them expected. What began as a struggle for survival grew into a chain of decisions, victories, and rivalries that shaped 600 years of history. Follow this timeline as each sultan lifts the empire higher, pushes it into danger, and leaves behind steps that lead toward a final turning point that changed everything. Osman's group lived along rough edges of old Byzantine land, where borders shifted and rival forces tested one another. Families relied on simple routines, and every season brought new risks that shaped the way people survived. Osman stood out because he kept calm during pressure and noticed chances others ignored. He encouraged unity and made sure everyone knew their role, which gave his followers structure in a place where many groups drifted. His willingness to act when threats appeared helped him build respect from warriors, who valued strength and stability. His leadership became the first step towards something far greater. As Osman took more responsibility for his people, he focused on building loyalty through fairness and predictable decisions. Tribal leaders noticed he did not seek attention, which made his influence grow more naturally. He created a small council that helped him look after resources, land, and movement patterns. His steady approach helped settle disputes that once took days to resolve. This style created confidence in his followers, who began trusting his long-term ideas. Instead of reacting to problems, he planned ahead, which set the tone for a group ready to move beyond basic survival. Early raids offered Osman a way to strengthen his group while also weakening nearby rivals who depended on unstable defenses. These raids were planned carefully, with scouts learning routes and weak points before his warriors advanced. Every success brought new supplies and opened small paths that connected to larger territories. The group gained horses, tools, and defensive advantages that allowed them to protect recently claimed ground. These targeted actions helped them grow without facing enemies they could not handle. Step by step, Osman shaped a force that could challenge local lords who once ignored his tribe entirely. Osman understood that moving forward required more than scattered victories. He began shaping a structured force with clear ranks, steady training, and consistent expectations. He encouraged discipline, which allowed his warriors to act with confidence during confrontations instead of relying on luck. He wanted the group to look beyond tribal identity and think in terms of a lasting community. This foundation helped everyone understand that they were building something larger than routine village life. The early sense of direction encouraged younger fighters to join, giving Osman more people to organize and trust during new campaigns. Alliances played a major role in Osman's rise. He gained support from nearby groups who respected his stability, and he avoided unnecessary fights that could drain his strength. These partnerships gave him access to food supplies, information networks, and safe movement across contested ground. Stronger rivals hesitated to attack him because they knew his allies would join the defense. The web of cooperation added a layer of protection and provided new opportunities for expansion. These agreements strengthened his influence without requiring constant battles, helping his group grow while holding on to the unity he worked hard to build. Early clashes showed Osman that his group could face stronger forces when organized correctly. Rivals tested his borders, expecting a loose tribal force, but they found disciplined fighters ready to protect new gains. These victories brought confidence that reshaped how people saw their future. Families who once expected displacement every few seasons now believed they could remain on land they worked. The growing sense of stability encouraged more settlements, and warriors from other regions joined Osman's group, drawn by its momentum. These successful confrontations confirmed that the frontier leader was building something sturdy enough to withstand pressure. Control over trade paths became a turning point. Osman learned which routes carried the most movement and positioned his group to influence them. Traders began recognizing his authority and preferred safe passage under his watch. This brought new income that strengthened his treasury and funded equipment for fighters. The steady flow of goods connected isolated villages and helped Osman reshape his territory into a more organized region. Other leaders noticed this growth and understood that Osman controlled pathways that linked major towns. This rising influence gave him leverage that mattered more than the size of his army. Unity became Osman's strongest tool. He encouraged people from different backgrounds to settle within his territory, giving them land, work, and protection. His emphasis on shared purpose helped reduce internal rivalries that once divided nearby tribes. Stories about his fairness reached distant communities, and more families traveled to join him. This steady migration helped his settlement grow into a regional center with its own identity. The new population brought skills, knowledge, and energy that strengthened his plans. Osman realized that a united community could achieve goals that scattered groups could never hope to reach. As Osman grew older, he understood that long-term stability required a clear succession plan. He prepared his son Orhan by involving him in councils, military planning, and agreements with allied groups. Orhan watched how his father balanced firmness with practicality, and learned how decisions shaped outcomes days or even months later. This involvement helped Orhan gain respect from commanders who saw him as a capable future leader. By guiding him early, Osman ensured that the growing community would not fall into conflict when leadership changed. His mentorship created the conditions for continuity beyond his own lifetime. Orhan stepped into leadership with a strong sense of direction shaped by years of observing his father's methods. He recognized that the group needed a structured state if they wanted long-term strength. His first actions involved organizing administrative roles that managed land, taxes, and military duties. This shift marked the transition from a loose tribal formation to a more recognized authority. Orhan's calm approach reassured families who feared sudden changes. He built upon Osman's foundation, taking careful steps to expand without losing the unity his father protected. His leadership marked the beginning of a real state. One of Orhan's main goals was creating stability through predictable governance. He set up early administrative offices that recorded land ownership, movement of goods, and obligations between different groups. These records helped settle disputes without long arguments, and gave people confidence that boundaries would be respected. Orhan's approach encouraged growth because settlers felt protected under clear rules. The organized system brought structure that made expansion easier to manage. Communities under his authority recognized that his steady leadership brought order in a region where most territories lacked consistency. This early bureaucracy allowed the state to expand with less confusion. Orhan recognized that a strong state needed a disciplined army, supported by reliable pay. He created a standing force that trained regularly, instead of gathering only when danger appeared. This constant preparation allowed his soldiers to respond quickly to threats and hold territory acquired during campaigns. The new structure gave fighters a clear career path with stable income. This encouraged loyalty and reduced the number of warriors switching sides for better rewards. Orhan's military reforms allowed him to move confidently into regions where rivals struggled to maintain organized resistance. This standing army became one of his most effective tools. Capturing key Byzantine towns helped Orhan expand his authority across valuable regions. These towns controlled trade routes and held supplies that strengthened his growing state. The captures were not reckless. They were planned with careful scouting and strategic timing. Each town brought new resources and additional populations who could support the expanding government. Some residents accepted Ottoman rule because Orhan's administrative system offered more stability than what they experienced under collapsing Byzantine officials. These early conquests gave Orhan an advantage that shifted regional power in his favor and opened a path toward further territorial gains. Building a strong state required more than military strength. Orhan invested in legal reforms that clarified responsibilities for both civilians and officers. These rules helped reduce disputes and created a sense of fairness across different groups. His legal structure encouraged cooperation between settlers, traders, and administrators, which supported the growth of towns under Ottoman control. Orhan wanted a system that worked even when he was not present, and these reforms helped create self-sustaining communities. This stability allowed him to focus on strategic opportunities instead of constantly resolving internal conflicts. His approach improved life for people across expanding territories. Religious institutions played an important part in Orhan's plan to unify his state. He encouraged the construction of places of worship and supported leaders who helped guide local communities. These institutions strengthened loyalty and offered a shared sense of identity across diverse populations. Their involvement in education helped produce capable administrators who could serve in expanding regions. By supporting these institutions, Orhan created a cultural foundation that connected distant settlements to the central authority. This unity helped maintain stability during times of growth and prepared the state for larger responsibilities that would soon emerge as expansion continued beyond familiar borders. Orhan relied on skilled workers to strengthen his growing centers of control. Builders, carpenters, and craftsmen contributed to new structures that supported markets, storage, and gathering spaces. These improvements helped towns operate more efficiently and encouraged movement between nearby regions. The steady flow of activity created momentum that attracted more families, and each new arrival added value to the developing state. Orhan understood that strong infrastructure served as a backbone for future plans. His focus on building reliable foundations made it easier for him to secure recently captured land and prepare for expansion toward more challenging territories. The partnership between soldiers and administrators became one of Orhan's most important strengths. Soldiers protected trade routes and settlements, while administrators managed taxes, supplies, and the needs of local communities. This cooperation reduced friction between civilian life and military operations. It also gave commanders the resources they needed to maintain order without draining nearby villages. The balanced system encouraged loyalty and helped Orhan control larger areas without overwhelming his forces. The growing coordination showed that the state could hold captured land for long periods, making expansion not just possible but practical. The formation of trained infantry marked a shift in how Orhan approached warfare. These early units, which would later become famous, followed strict routines that focused on discipline rather than tribal loyalty. Their training allowed them to perform tasks that cavalry alone could not handle, especially during sieges or defensive operations. This force provided Orhan with flexibility that earlier leaders lacked. The development of a dependable infantry gave him the confidence to challenge fortified positions once considered too risky. It also signaled the beginning of a military identity that would shape the empire for centuries. With stronger systems and reliable forces in place, Orhan prepared the state for movement into Europe. He studied the weaknesses of nearby Byzantine lands and identified areas where Ottoman forces could advance without facing overwhelming resistance. Bridges, ports, and crossings became targets of interest, each one offering access to new regions. Scouts mapped routes and assessed how local populations might react to a change in authority. Orhan treated this expansion as a long-term strategy rather than a quick strike. His careful planning set the stage for one of the most significant phases of Ottoman growth. Murad entered leadership with a sharper military focus shaped by years of observing his father's operations. He recognized that control of European paths would decide the future of the empire. To secure these opportunities, he began reorganizing the army into units that could move efficiently across varied terrain. Murad knew that every successful step into Europe increased both risk and reward, and he prepared his forces for strong resistance. His early decisions revealed a leader determined to push the state far beyond its original borders. This new phase carried higher stakes than ever before. Murad designed a strategy that centered on securing vital European positions before rivals could react. He established strongholds near river crossings and trade intersections that connected large regions. These positions allowed him to move troops with confidence and apply pressure when needed. Local groups watched his expansion with growing concern, but Murad focused on building a chain of secure points rather than chasing immediate victories. His structured approach made each gain easier to reinforce. The expanding network of fortified locations signaled that the Ottomans were becoming a permanent presence in Europe, not just a temporary force. Ottoman forces crossed deeper into Europe and began taking ground that had long belonged to weakened Byzantine and local powers. Villages and small towns shifted under new control, giving Murad access to resources that supported future campaigns. The advance made regional leaders uneasy, and some attempted quick alliances to slow the Ottoman push. Murad continued strengthening his positions, understanding that each successful step depended on reliable supply lines. The growing European foothold raised expectations among his commanders and created momentum that shaped the empire's future. If you are enjoying this journey, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing where you are watching from. Murad recognized that rapid growth required careful organization. He restructured sections of the army to ensure leadership remained clear and responsive. Units trained under consistent standards, allowing them to operate together with fewer misunderstandings. This reorganization improved communication between commanders in distant regions. The improved structure meant that reinforcements could reach battlefields faster, and advanced teams could secure territory that once seemed unreachable. Murad's reforms helped the empire manage its expanding responsibilities and reduced the risk of losing ground during periods of pressure from surrounding states. As Ottoman influence spread across the Balkans, Murad encountered new cultures, rivalries, and alliances. Each newly controlled region required careful handling to prevent uprisings. Administrators worked closely with local leaders to maintain order, while soldiers protected roads and towns. The expansion revealed how important steady governance was for long-term success. Murad balanced military pressure with practical management, ensuring that conquered areas integrated into the growing empire rather than becoming constant battlegrounds. This approach helped secure the Balkans as a core part of Ottoman strategy and strengthened the empire's position across Europe. Murad introduced a system that rewarded loyal fighters with land or income from designated areas. This motivated soldiers to perform well in battle and maintain strong discipline. The reward structure also helped settle experienced fighters near important borders, where their presence strengthened regional stability. These placements created layers of defense and gave local communities trained protectors who understood the value of order. Murad's strategy connected loyalty with long-term responsibility, allowing the empire to grow without losing the trust of those who served. The system became a key part of Ottoman administration during future campaigns. As Ottoman control expanded, European coalitions formed to stop further advances. Fear of losing territory pushed rival leaders into cooperation, even among groups that previously fought each other. Murad faced pressure from multiple fronts, but his steady leadership helped him maintain direction. His commanders understood that these alliances posed real danger, yet they also recognized that the Ottoman structure offered advantages their opponents lacked. Murad prepared for large conflicts by strengthening supply lines and gathering intelligence on enemy movements. The rising tension signaled that Europe understood the scale of the Ottoman rise. The confrontation at Kosovo became one of the defining moments of Murad's rule. Both sides knew the outcome would influence control of the Balkans. The battle was intense and costly, but the Ottomans held their ground and pushed back forces that hoped to block their expansion. Although Murad lost his life during the conflict, his legacy shaped the direction of the empire. The victory secured crucial territory and reinforced Ottoman presence in Europe. The result convinced rivals that the empire had the strength to survive even under severe pressure. Murad's leadership had transformed the Ottomans into a regional power with influence across vast areas. His disciplined army, expanded footholds, and organized systems provided a strong foundation for future rulers. The empire now had fortified positions, established supply networks, and loyal warriors ready to defend new borders. Murad's work showed that the Ottomans were no longer a minor frontier group, but an emerging force that other states had to consider in their strategies. His accomplishments marked the beginning of a more ambitious phase that would shape the coming decades. Bayezid entered leadership with unmatched speed and ambition. His determination to continue the European advance pushed the empire into new campaigns immediately. Commanders recognized his sharp instincts and ability to make decisions under pressure. Bayezid viewed hesitation as weakness, and he took bold steps to secure newly gained territory. His approach energized the army, but also created risks because rapid moves strained supply lines and demanded constant readiness. His rise signaled a shift toward a faster, more aggressive strategy that changed the pace of Ottoman expansion and challenged surrounding states to keep up. Bayezid believed the empire could dominate both Anatolia and Europe at once. He launched campaigns that struck multiple regions, forcing rivals to defend scattered positions. His quick victories impressed some leaders and alarmed others who feared the Ottomans had become unstoppable. Bayezid centralized power around himself to keep control over the expanding structure. His confidence inspired the army, but his fast pace created growing pressure as he attempted to manage too many fronts. Despite these risks, his actions pushed the empire toward heights that few had ever imagined possible. Bayezid's plan relied on aggressive action to discourage resistance. He attempted to bring rival Anatolian beyliks under his authority, believing the region must be united for the empire to survive stronger enemies. His assertive approach caused friction with rulers who refused to submit. Bayezid responded with force, determined to remove challenges before they grew larger. These campaigns gained territory but increased tension with neighboring powers who worried about his unchecked ambition. The expanding pressure set the stage for future conflicts that would test the empire's stability. Each of Bayezid's victories added more land but required more soldiers, supplies, and organization. As his reach grew, logistics became harder to manage, and commanders had to move quickly to maintain control. Bayezid noticed that some territories resisted Ottoman rule more fiercely than expected, forcing him to divide his focus. The constant pace strained his forces, who had to recover and prepare for the next advance with little time. Even with these challenges, Bayezid continued pushing forward, convinced that rapid expansion would protect the empire from surrounding threats. Bayezid attempted to strengthen his authority by centralizing decision-making within the palace. He reduced the influence of regional leaders and insisted that major choices pass through him. This approach helped coordinate military activity, but also created resentment among groups who felt sidelined. Some administrators worried that Bayezid's tight control left little room for local flexibility. While his centralization increased efficiency during campaigns, it also made the empire more dependent on his personal judgment. This concentration of power shaped the challenges he would later face when external threats grew stronger. Bayezid developed a formidable cavalry force that became the center of his military identity. These fast-moving units allowed him to strike distant enemies before they could organize a defense. Cavalry commanders learned to move across rough terrain, intercept supply caravans, and overwhelm slower armies. This gave Bayezid a major advantage in open-field battles. His reputation grew quickly as rival states realized how difficult it was to predict or counter his rapid maneuvers. The strength of the cavalry supported his larger vision, but it also encouraged him to take risks that demanded constant victories. Bayezid's ambition eventually put him on a collision course with Timur, a powerful ruler expanding from the east. Both leaders claimed influence over similar territories, and neither wanted to yield ground. The rivalry grew as each side gathered allies and prepared for confrontation. Diplomacy failed because neither man trusted the other, and both believed they could win a decisive victory. The growing tension created uncertainty across the region as smaller states wondered which side would prevail. This looming conflict threatened to reshape the entire balance of power surrounding the Ottoman Empire. The battle against Timur became one of the most damaging events in Ottoman history. Bayezid entered the confrontation expecting a strong performance, but Timur's forces overwhelmed the Ottomans through superior coordination and numbers. The defeat shattered Bayezid's momentum, and he was captured during the conflict. The loss stunned the empire, which had grown accustomed to constant expansion. Commanders scattered, territories fell out of control, and the carefully built structure began to fracture. The defeat marked a dramatic turning point that forced the empire to confront its own limits. With Bayezid captured, the empire broke into competing factions led by his sons. Each prince sought support from regional leaders and military units, hoping to claim the throne. This division weakened the empire's borders and encouraged neighboring states to reclaim lost territory. Trade routes became unsafe, and communication between provinces collapsed. Families who once relied on stable Ottoman rule faced uncertainty as rival groups fought for dominance. The internal struggle drained resources and left the empire vulnerable to attacks from all directions. The once rapidly expanding power now struggled to maintain its core structure. The conflict between Bayezid's sons turned into a prolonged civil struggle. None of the princes had enough strength to control the entire empire, and shifting alliances prolonged the chaos. Each region operated differently depending on which prince held influence there. The lack of unified leadership allowed outside forces to intervene or exploit weak points. Commanders loyal to the previous system worried that the empire might not recover. The ongoing disruptions placed immense pressure on communities that had grown used to organized governance. The internal collapse threatened to undo everything Osman and his successors had built. As the conflict continued, enemies along the borders advanced into Ottoman-held territories. Former rivals sensed opportunity and reclaimed towns that had fallen under Ottoman control during earlier campaigns. Trade suffered as caravans avoided unsafe roads, and the empire's economy weakened. Military units loyal to different princes clashed instead of defending vulnerable regions. The internal fighting drained supplies and diverted attention from external dangers. The empire risked losing its position entirely if stability did not return soon. People across the region waited for a leader who could restore unity and rebuild what had been damaged. Mehmed I emerged as the prince capable of restoring order. His calm approach and consistent decision-making earned him support from commanders who were tired of the ongoing struggle. He worked to settle disputes between rival factions and brought key leaders together to rebuild central authority. Mehmed recognized that recovery required cooperation rather than force alone. By focusing on reconciliation, he began repairing communication lines and strengthening administrative structures. His leadership marked the start of a slow return to stability and gave the empire a chance to reclaim its position in the region. Mehmed I focused on ending the conflicts that had torn the empire apart. He met with rival commanders, listened to their concerns, and offered positions that encouraged cooperation instead of resistance. His approach reduced hostilities that had drained the state for years. Regions once controlled by competing princes slowly returned to central authority. Trade routes reopened as stability grew, helping communities regain confidence. Mehmed avoided unnecessary battles and instead worked to restore trust across the empire. His leadership marked the first real progress toward repairing the damage caused by the long struggle. Once internal fighting settled, Mehmed began rebuilding institutions that had collapsed during the civil conflict. Administrative offices were reorganized, and reliable officials were placed in areas that needed the most attention. His goal was to restore order before focusing on expansion again. Mehmed understood that the empire's strength depended on structures that worked consistently. He focused on distributing resources, rebuilding communication lines, and ensuring that taxes reached the central treasury. These actions gave the government the stability needed to function properly, and prepared the empire for challenges that might arise in the future. Mehmed I turned his attention to unrest in both Anatolia and the Balkans. Local groups who had resisted during the civil struggle now faced a leader who offered stability but demanded loyalty. Mehmed balanced firmness with opportunities for cooperation, giving each region a chance to reintegrate peacefully. In areas where resistance continued, he used targeted force supported by trained units who had returned to discipline under his rule. His actions restored control across key territories and calmed fears that the empire might collapse. This renewed order raised confidence among leaders who sought steady governance. Murad II inherited a state that had recently regained stability, but he knew it still faced major threats. His focus turned toward rebuilding military strength that had weakened during the internal conflicts. He reorganized units, reinforced discipline, and ensured that commanders followed consistent standards. Murad wanted an army capable of defending expanded borders and responding to growing pressure from Europe. He trained new recruits and restored veteran units that had scattered during the earlier chaos. Under his direction, the empire regained its ability to act decisively, setting the stage for renewed expansion during his rule. Murad II pushed to reclaim territories lost during the Civil War. His campaigns in Europe targeted strategic towns and regions that controlled important travel routes. Each victory helped restore the empire's reputation and reassured allies who depended on Ottoman strength. Murad balanced speed with caution, making sure supply lines remained intact as he advanced. The return of these regions strengthened the empire's influence across the Balkans. People who lived in recovered areas saw improvements in security and governance, further stabilizing the region and strengthening Murad's position as a capable leader. Despite Murad's progress, European coalitions continued challenging Ottoman expansion. States that once fought each other now aligned to slow Murad's advances. These alliances created unpredictable threats that required constant awareness. Murad monitored troop movements, intercepted messages, and prepared defensive positions along vulnerable borders. His strategic planning reduced the risk of being caught off guard by coordinated attacks. Even with pressure rising, Murad maintained focus on consolidating his gains. The growing resistance showed that the empire had become a major concern for surrounding powers who feared losing more territory. Murad II strengthened governance by selecting advisors who understood both military and administrative needs. He relied on officials who could provide accurate information about distant regions, allowing him to make informed decisions. This close coordination helped prevent small problems from turning into larger disruptions. Murad worked carefully to balance authority between local leaders and central officials, reducing friction that could threaten stability. His methodical leadership built trust among commanders who had experienced instability for years. The renewed sense of order encouraged continued cooperation across expanding territories and supported Murad's long-term goals. As Murad approached the later part of his rule, he arranged a controlled transfer of power to his young son, Mehmed II. He wanted to ensure the empire transitioned smoothly and avoided another internal struggle. Mehmed was introduced to state affairs early, giving him exposure to military planning, diplomacy, and administration. Murad hoped this early experience would prepare Mehmed for the demands of leadership. The planned transition aimed to protect the empire from sudden shifts and preserve the progress made since the Civil War. This decision shaped the future more than anyone expected. Mehmed II faced immediate challenges when he first took the throne. His youth raised doubts among experienced commanders who questioned whether he could handle rising threats. Rival states tested his authority, believing they could pressure the empire during what they saw as a period of weakness. Mehmed attempted to manage these difficulties, But the pressure mounted quickly. Internal concerns and external risks created a situation that threatened the stability Murad had worked hard to restore. Commanders feared that the empire might be pushed into vulnerability if decisive action was not taken soon. Recognizing the strain his son faced, Murad II returned to leadership temporarily to stabilize the situation. His presence reassured commanders and discouraged enemies from exploiting the empire's moment of uncertainty. Murad's return allowed the state to regroup, strengthen defenses, and reassert authority across sensitive regions. This move protected Mehmed from immediate danger and preserved the empire's momentum. Under Murad's renewed guidance, the Ottomans regained their footing. His actions ensured that the empire would remain strong long enough for Mehmed to eventually take power again under more favorable conditions. When Mehmed II returned to the throne for his second reign, he entered with a clearer plan and a stronger sense of direction. His primary goal centered on capturing Constantinople, a city whose location controlled major trade routes and carried symbolic importance across the region. Mehmed studied the city's defenses, identified weaknesses, and began preparing forces capable of confronting one of the most fortified positions of the era. His determination pushed the empire into a new phase defined by ambition and careful planning. Leaders around him recognized that this goal would reshape the region's political landscape. To prepare for the upcoming siege, Mehmed II invested heavily in advanced artillery, including massive cannons capable of breaching thick walls. He organized a large naval force to control access by sea, and built fortresses along key routes to block Byzantine supply lines. Engineers designed tools and structures that supported prolonged operations. These preparations showed how committed he was to achieving his goal. Mehmed's attention to detail helped create a combined force that could pressure the city from multiple directions. With the plan forming steadily, the empire positioned itself for one of its most decisive campaigns. The siege of Constantinople demonstrated how carefully Mehmed II coordinated every part of his strategy. Ottoman forces surrounded the city by land and sea, leaving defenders with limited options. The artillery shattered sections of the walls, creating breaches that forced defenders into constant repair efforts. Mehmed maintained pressure by rotating units to keep the offensive steady. Inside the city, supplies ran low, and morale weakened as the siege continued. Each day that passed strengthened Mehmed's position while placing greater strain on the defenders. The momentum slowly shifted toward the Ottomans controlling the outcome. The fall of Constantinople became a turning point in world history. When Ottoman forces broke through the final defenses, the city's centuries-long rule under the Byzantines came to an end. The victory transformed the empire's status and marked the rise of a new power. Mehmed II entered the city with clear plans for rebuilding, knowing its location would become the center of his expanding state. The event reshaped trade, politics, and influence across the region. Many rulers realized they now faced a force capable of altering the direction of entire nations. After securing Constantinople, Mehmed II focused on transforming it into a thriving capital. He repaired damaged areas, restored essential structures, and invited skilled workers, traders, and families to settle there. His approach encouraged growth and helped rebuild the city's population. The renewed capital served as a political and cultural hub, connecting different regions of the empire. Mehmed's commitment to revitalizing the city showed his long-term vision for a unified and powerful state. The capital's revival played a major role in shaping the empire's identity and strengthening its position in global affairs. Mehmed II created a multi-ethnic administrative system that allowed various communities to operate under Ottoman authority while maintaining their traditions. This approach encouraged cooperation and reduced conflict across regions with diverse populations. Local leaders handled internal matters, while the central government managed major decisions. This system made it easier to govern newly captured territories by offering stability without forcing dramatic changes. The flexibility helped people accept Ottoman rule, and communities benefited from the consistent protections the empire provided. Mehmed's administrative design supported long-lasting control across a wide range of cultures. With the capital secure and administrative systems established, Mehmed II began new campaigns across the Balkans and Anatolia. He targeted regions that threatened Ottoman interests or controlled important routes. His forces moved with precision supported by experienced commanders. Each campaign strengthened the empire's reach and reduced the power of rival states. Mehmed understood that securing borders required constant attention, and he committed resources to ensure that no major threats could regroup. His military success further solidified his reputation as one of the most decisive rulers in Ottoman history. Mayem Bisi reformed various institutions to strengthen long-term control. He reorganized tax collection to ensure consistent revenue and adjusted legal structures, so they aligned with the expanding state. These reforms improved efficiency and reduced opportunities for corruption. By creating a more predictable system, Mayem Bisit helped communities operate with clearer expectations. The updated structure supported economic activity and encouraged growth across the empire. These reforms made it easier for the government to manage distant territories without losing influence or creating unnecessary conflict between populations. Mehmed T recognized the importance of predictable systems for both economic and social stability. He developed a more organized tax and legal framework that supported trade, agriculture, and settlement expansion. Merchants felt safer moving goods across wider areas because they understood how regulations worked under Ottoman authority. This predictability strengthened the economy and encouraged investment in new regions. The stable system reinforced the empire's ability to operate smoothly even during periods of conflict. Mehmed's focus on consistency helped maintain order across diverse territories. As Mehmed II's rule progressed, Bayezid II rose as the next leader shaped by caution and a preference for stability. He did not seek rapid expansion, but instead worked on maintaining what the empire already held. Bayezid evaluated the challenges ahead and prioritized strengthening institutions, trade networks, and internal peace. His leadership style contrasted with the aggressive moves of previous rulers, but it provided a period of calm that allowed the empire to adjust after major changes. His focus on steady governance prepared the state for future pressures that would emerge on multiple fronts. Selim entered leadership with a sharper edge than his father, driven by a desire to reshape the empire's position in the region. His rise followed tense disputes within the dynasty, and his determination won support from commanders who favored a more assertive direction. Selim believed the empire needed firmer control over eastern borders, where rival powers threatened long-term stability. He prepared the military for campaigns that required coordination across large distances. His approach marked a clear shift toward rapid action and left no room for hesitation as he planned the next phase of expansion. As Selim secured authority, he began planning campaigns against the Safavids, a rising force whose influence challenged Ottoman goals. Selim saw them as a strategic threat that needed to be confronted before they grew stronger. He gathered intelligence, strengthened border defenses, and prepared elite units for the coming conflict. Selim believed that victory against a powerful eastern rival would define his rule and shape the empire's future. His decisions created anticipation across the state, as leaders understood that the coming battles would decide control over vital regions that affected trade, culture, and long-term power. Selim launched a campaign that moved with remarkable efficiency. His forces advanced through difficult terrain, maintaining focus despite long marches and scattered resistance. The decisive confrontation resulted in a clear Ottoman victory, weakening Safavid influence and proving Selim's leadership capabilities. This success expanded Ottoman control across large stretches of land and increased the empire's confidence in its strength. Selim's victory also secured strategic routes that supported future operations. The campaign shifted the balance of power in the region and positioned the Ottomans as a dominant force capable of challenging major rivals. Following his success against the Safavids, Selim turned his attention toward the Arab lands. These regions held key religious centers and controlled important trade pathways connecting Africa and Asia. Selim viewed control of these areas as both a strategic and symbolic goal. His forces advanced quickly, taking cities that had long served as influential cultural and economic hubs. The campaign strengthened Ottoman presence across vast territories and reshaped the empire's identity. Selim's rapid progress created excitement among supporters who saw the empire rising to new prominence and gaining influence over regions central to global movement. Selim's capture of important religious centers elevated both his authority and the empire's standing. These gains reinforced the Ottomans as major leaders within the broader Islamic world, connecting political strength with religious trust. The newly secured lands brought valuable resources and strengthened trade networks. Selim's achievements expanded the empire's reach in ways that would influence generations. His actions placed the Ottomans at the center of regional affairs, giving the state responsibilities far greater than before. This shift prepared the empire for a new era of leadership under the man who would follow him, Suleiman. began his rule with a balanced combination of ambition, organization, and long-term thinking. He recognized the advantages left by Suleiman's victories and planned to build upon them through military, legal, and cultural reforms. His campaigns targeted strategic regions across Europe and the Mediterranean, where rival powers attempted to regain ground lost to the Ottomans. Suleiman believed that expanding influence required both strength and structure, so he invested in systems that supported administration as much as battlefield success. His arrival marked the start of what many would later view as the empire's most accomplished period. Campaigns into Europe became one of Suleiman's defining efforts. His forces pushed into regions that controlled access to Central Europe, challenging powerful kingdoms that once held firm positions. The capture of key strongholds showed rival states how capable the Ottoman army had become. Suleiman advanced with careful planning supported by experienced commanders. Each victory extended the empire's reach and increased pressure on European coalitions trying to hold their borders. These accomplishments strengthened Suleiman's reputation as a disciplined leader who understood how to balance bold moves with strategic patience across difficult terrain. Suleiman strengthened the empire's naval presence, understanding that control of the seas shaped influence over distant regions. He invested in shipbuilding centers, trained skilled crews, and supported admirals capable of coordinating large fleets. The improved navy succeeded in securing important coastal routes and challenging rival naval powers in the Mediterranean. These successes opened trade networks, secured supply lines, and allowed the Ottomans to influence regions previously limited by distance. The enhanced naval strength demonstrated that Suleiman viewed the empire not just as a land-based power, but as a force capable of shaping events across vast bodies of water. One of Suleiman's most lasting contributions came through his legal reforms. He organized laws to create a more consistent system across diverse regions, reducing uncertainty for both civilians and administrators. These reforms helped settle disputes fairly and encourage stability within growing communities. Suleiman believed that organized legal structures supported economic growth, so he worked to ensure that rights and responsibilities were clear throughout the empire. His efforts created a dependable environment that strengthened loyalty among populations living far from the capital. The legal framework he established continued guiding the empire long after his rule. Suleiman supported architecture and culture as vital parts of a thriving state. He sponsored builders, artists, and scholars who transformed cities into centers of learning and craftsmanship. Architecturally impressive structures rose across the empire, symbolizing prosperity and unity. These projects attracted skilled workers who added to the empire's cultural fabric. Suleiman saw these achievements as more than displays of wealth. They helped strengthen identity and pride across distant regions. Cultural investments encouraged settlements to grow and reinforced the empire's reputation as a center of creativity and advancement during his era. Despite Suleiman's strengths, rising European powers began developing new strategies and technologies that created challenges for the empire. Improved firearms, fortified towns, and coordinated alliances pushed back against Ottoman advances. Suleiman analyzed these changes carefully, understanding that old methods might not always work. His commanders had to adapt to unfamiliar tactics and new forms of resistance. These developments forced the empire to reassess its approach in regions where progress once seemed straightforward. The shifting landscape signaled that future campaigns required more preparation than earlier efforts, raising concerns about long-term momentum. As Suleiman aged, the influence of advisors and court officials increased. These figures shaped decisions across administrative and military matters, sometimes easing his workload and sometimes complicating it. The growing importance of these advisors reflected the expanding responsibilities of the empire. Their guidance affected how resources were distributed, how regions were governed, and how succession would be managed. Competing interests within the palace created pressure that required careful attention. Suleiman relied on trusted officials while navigating the political landscape, knowing that missteps inside the palace could affect stability far beyond the capital. Palace politics grew more complex, especially regarding succession. Princes positioned themselves for future leadership, backed by different court factions seeking influence. Advisors, administrators, and other insiders attempted to guide political outcomes that favored their interests. These competing pressures created uncertainty that reached beyond the palace walls. Regional leaders watched closely, aware that instability in the capital could affect governance across the empire. Suleiman attempted to maintain order, but the growing layers of influence made harmony difficult to achieve. This internal complexity shaped the challenges future sultans would face. As Suleiman continued leading, his final campaigns revealed how much the empire depended on steady direction. Although still capable, he faced difficulties caused by aging, administrative strain, and rising resistance from rival powers. His later efforts aimed to secure key regions rather than expand aggressively. The empire remained strong, but maintaining control required more energy than before. Commanders recognized the significance of sustaining stability as Suleiman's era approached its close. His final years showed how even the most successful leaders eventually faced limits that influenced the empire's long-term direction. Tension between competing princes increased as Suleiman's rule neared its end. Each one believed he had a claim to leadership and gathered support from court factions, military units, and influential advisors. This competition created an atmosphere of uncertainty that extended across the empire. Regional leaders hesitated to make major decisions until the future became clearer. The looming transition forced commanders to prepare for potential conflict within the dynasty. The struggle among princes foreshadowed a period of unstable succession that would challenge the empire after Suleiman's era, shaping the difficulties future rulers would inherit. The period that followed Suleiman's rule became known for increased influence from the palace interior. Mothers of princes, advisors, and experienced officials played larger roles in guiding decisions. This shift occurred because some new sultans lacked the strength or preparation of earlier rulers. The influence of these figures shaped diplomatic choices, military plans, and administrative actions. While some provided valuable direction, others sought personal advantage, creating internal friction. The growing reliance on palace figures marked a significant change in how the empire operated, raising concerns about the long-term effects of such concentrated internal power. The imperial harem became an important political center, where key decisions were shaped by individuals who had no formal administrative roles but held significant access to the sultan. Their guidance influenced succession plans, alliances, and appointments. Court officials navigated these dynamics carefully, knowing that support from influential palace members could determine their future. This environment created opportunities and challenges, as groups competed for attention and influence. The shift in power dynamics inside the palace demonstrated how leadership styles and personal relationships affected the empire's direction during this transitional period. Weaker leadership during this era increased dependence on palace figures. Some sultans struggled to assert authority, allowing administrators, military leaders, and court insiders to shape policies. This imbalance created inconsistencies across regions, as different groups pushed for their preferred outcomes. The lack of firm direction weakened the state's ability to respond to outside threats and internal disruptions. As responsibilities shifted toward individuals who operated without unified strategy, cracks began to appear in the administrative structure. These challenges made it harder for the empire to maintain the steady progress it enjoyed under stronger rulers. The Janissaries, once disciplined infantry units, gained increasing influence over political matters. Their involvement went beyond military duties, extending into leadership decisions, financial demands, and succession disputes. Their power made them difficult to control, and sultans needed their support to maintain authority. This shift altered the original purpose of the corps and introduced instability into the political system. Their growing impact created uncertainty whenever leadership changed, as they could influence outcomes through coordinated pressure. The expanding role of the Janissaries contributed to tensions that future sultans would struggle to manage. Conflicts between regional governors and palace authorities increased, as both sides attempted to assert control. Governors wanted flexibility to manage local issues, while palace officials insisted on centralized decisions. This tension created delays in responding to regional problems such as taxation disputes, border challenges, and local uprisings. The lack of coordination frustrated communities that depended on consistent governance. Commanders stationed in distant areas noticed the weakening connection between the capital and frontier regions. The increasing strain revealed deeper administrative issues that required stronger leadership to resolve, but instead continued expanding across multiple provinces. Several sultans during this era ruled briefly, their limited authority reflecting the turbulence inside the palace. Short reigns created confusion, as each new sultan brought a different approach to governance. Policies shifted quickly, and administrative continuity became difficult to maintain. These rapid changes weakened the empire's ability to focus on long-term goals. Regions that relied on predictable leadership struggled to adjust to constant shifts. The unstable environment encouraged opportunistic behavior from internal factions, each trying to benefit from the uncertainty. The empire's once dependable leadership structure had entered a period marked by inconsistency. Disputes over succession became frequent as competing heirs, and their supporters pushed for control. Without clear processes, succession often depended on palace maneuvering rather than organized transitions. These disputes created uncertainty across the empire. Military units aligned with different factions. Administrators hesitated to act decisively, and regions waited for clarity before committing to policies. The rising number of contested transitions strained central authority and made it harder to maintain order. Each dispute weakened the empire's ability to project strength externally and made internal unity increasingly difficult to preserve. Internal pressure grew as multiple groups attempted to influence the direction of the empire. Administrators, military units, palace figures, and regional leaders each pushed their interests, creating a divided environment. This prevented the state from focusing on external threats, allowing rivals to gain advantages. The growing internal complexity slowed decision-making, leaving important matters unresolved for long periods. The empire still held vast territories, but the lack of unified leadership limited its ability to manage them effectively. The accumulation of these internal pressures began shaping challenges that would influence the next phase of decline. As internal challenges increased, the empire faced stronger European rivals who had developed new technologies and strategies. Their improved weapons, naval fleets, and alliances posed serious risks to Ottoman influence. These rivals continued gaining ground, especially in regions where Ottoman control had weakened. The empire struggled to match the pace of European advancements, and commanders faced enemies better equipped and more coordinated than before. These defeats signaled that the empire needed fundamental changes to maintain its position. The gap between Ottoman methods and European progress widened with each passing year. The empire began recognizing the need for modernization as pressures mounted. Leaders studied European approaches, hoping to adjust their own systems. Efforts were made to introduce new weapons, reorganize troops, and update methods of administration. However, resistance emerged from groups who feared losing traditions, influence, or privileges. This resistance slowed progress and created friction between reformers and those opposed to change. The struggle to modernize revealed how difficult it had become to maintain unity while keeping pace with evolving global dynamics. The need for reform was clear, yet achieving it required overcoming deep-rooted obstacles. Sultans who recognized the empire's declining military strength attempted to modernize the army by bringing in new training methods and updated equipment. They studied how European armies organized their forces and tried to adapt similar structures. Some units accepted the changes, but others resisted, believing older methods still held value. This division slowed progress and created tension within the ranks. Reformers understood that the empire's future depended on keeping pace with foreign powers, yet they struggled to convince everyone that change was necessary. The push for modernization became one of the defining challenges of this period. Resistance to reform grew stronger among groups who feared losing long-held roles. Some believed that new training or equipment threatened their influence, while others distrusted ideas coming from outside the empire. This opposition created delays that weakened military readiness. Sultans supporting modernization had to balance enforcing new policies with preventing internal conflict. Their efforts to introduce updated systems exposed the deep divide between those who embraced progress and those who clung tightly to familiar traditions. These clashes showed how difficult it had become to unify the empire behind a shared plan for long-term survival. As European powers advanced their military technology, the empire struggled to keep up. Cannons, firearms, and naval designs continued improving abroad while Ottoman forces relied on outdated equipment. This gap became clear during confrontations where opponents demonstrated superior range, accuracy, and coordination. Commanders realized that older methods no longer produced the results they once did. The empire faced growing pressure to upgrade even basic tools of war. Each defeat highlighted the urgency of reform, yet internal resistance made it difficult to implement these upgrades quickly enough to protect territories from encroaching powers. Naval weaknesses became especially damaging as European fleets expanded their reach. Ottoman ships that once controlled large parts of the Mediterranean now struggled to compete with faster and more heavily armed vessels. Key coastal positions became harder to defend, and trade routes grew vulnerable to foreign influence. Several attempts were made to improve shipbuilding, But progress came slowly because skilled labor and modern designs were lacking. The inability to match rival fleets weakened the empire's influence over distant regions and forced leaders to rethink strategies that had worked well in previous centuries. Financial strain became a major obstacle, as the empire faced constant pressure on multiple fronts. Wars drained the treasury, and the cost of maintaining outdated systems increased each year. Tax collection grew inconsistent in regions experiencing unrest, reducing income and creating shortages. Leaders attempted to borrow money to stabilize the situation, but those loans came with harsh conditions that reduced the empire's independence. The financial instability affected every level of governance, making it harder to support reform efforts or invest in long-term solutions. The economy struggled to keep pace with the growing demands of the state. Corruption spread through administrative levels as weakened oversight allowed officials to take advantage of the system. Some collected more taxes than required, while others used their positions to secure personal benefits. This behavior damaged trust between the central government and regional communities. It also hindered attempts to coordinate responses to external threats, as resources often failed to reach the places where they were most needed. Efforts to address corruption had limited success because the problem had become embedded in daily operations. This growing issue added another layer of difficulty to an already strained empire. New reformers emerged with plans to reshape the empire's systems. They believed that survival required strong administrative changes, improved education, and a modernized military. These individuals studied developments abroad and attempted to introduce similar approaches at home. Their ideas inspired support among younger officials eager for progress. However, entrenched groups resisted, leading to repeated arguments over how far reform should go. Despite obstacles, the reformers gained momentum by pointing to recent defeats and territorial losses as proof that transformation could no longer be postponed. Their push for change marked the start of a new period of adjustment. Early efforts to reorganize education and legal processes aimed to create a new generation of administrators trained for the empire's evolving needs. Schools were established to teach modern subjects, and updated legal codes attempted to bring more consistency to governance. These steps helped standardize practices across different regions and improved communication between distant provinces. Some communities welcomed the changes, while others questioned whether they aligned with long-standing customs. Even with mixed reactions, the reforms laid groundwork for a more structured administrative system capable of handling the complexities of a large and diverse state. Attempts to reduce the influence of the Janissaries became central to the reform movement. Their resistance made modernization nearly impossible, as they opposed new training methods and changes that threatened their status. Reformers understood that the empire needed a disciplined and adaptable military force, something the Janissaries no longer consistently provided. Efforts to introduce alternative units created tension, and several confrontations erupted as the corps pushed back against any threat to their authority. The struggle to control or reorganize the Janissaries became one of the most significant challenges facing sultans who sought to reshape the empire's future. National movements began forming within various regions of the empire, each driven by growing interest in independence or local identity. Cultural differences, economic concerns, and resentment towards central authority fueled these movements. Leaders within these regions saw opportunities as the empire weakened and sought greater autonomy. The rise of these movements created new tensions that required careful handling. Each one placed pressure on the empire's ability to maintain unity across its vast territories. The emergence of these groups illustrated how internal divisions were becoming just as threatening as external rivals. The Tanzimat reforms were introduced with the goal of modernizing the empire into a more efficient and fair state. Leaders focused on reorganizing taxes, improving legal rights, and restructuring the military. These reforms aimed to create equal treatment across communities and reduce corruption. By establishing clearer rules and expanding central authority, the Tanzimat period attempted to build a stable foundation for future growth. The changes brought hope to some regions and resistance in others. Regardless of the mixed reactions, the reforms signaled a major shift in how the empire planned to address its growing challenges. Reforms targeting taxes and rights aimed to create fairness across different populations. Updated tax systems reduced arbitrary fees and encouraged predictable contributions. Legal rights were expanded to protect individuals regardless of community or background. These efforts attempted to strengthen loyalty to the empire by ensuring that people felt included in its future. Officials trained under new guidelines began managing local matters with clearer expectations. The changes improved organization in many regions but also created friction among groups who preferred older methods. The push for fairness became a defining theme of the Tanzimat era. New schools opened during this period to train officials capable of handling modern administrative tasks. Students learned languages, science, and legal studies that aligned with contemporary needs. Graduates were placed in government offices where they introduced more efficient practices. These educational reforms helped reduce inconsistencies between regions and encouraged a more unified approach to governance. They also produced officials who could engage with foreign powers using shared diplomatic knowledge. The growing number of trained administrators strengthened central authority and provided the empire with a more reliable structure during a time of rapid change. Communities across the empire reacted differently to the reforms. Some embraced the new systems, appreciating the increased fairness and organization they brought. Others rejected the changes, believing they conflicted with long-standing traditions or local customs. These mixed reactions created tension between reformers and traditional leaders. In some regions, disagreements led to unrest that required careful intervention by central authorities. The uneven acceptance of reforms demonstrated how diverse the empire had become. Leaders recognized that successful modernization required understanding the needs of each region, while staying committed to larger goals for the empire's survival. European involvement increased as foreign powers sought influence within the empire. Advisors, diplomats, and financial representatives became active in shaping policies that aligned with their own interests. Some offered support for reforms, while others used the empire's weaknesses to gain economic or political advantages. This growing involvement reduced the empire's independence and made decision-making more complicated. Sultan and officials had to navigate foreign pressure carefully to avoid agreements that could limit sovereignty. The presence of foreign influence became a constant element in the empire's internal affairs, affecting nearly every major decision. Financial dependence on European lenders grew as the empire struggled to fund reforms and manage ongoing conflicts. Loans offered temporary relief but came with strict conditions that reduced control over economic decisions. Interest payments drained resources needed for essential services, and some regions suffered from lack of investment, as funds were redirected to meet foreign obligations. The financial strain undermined confidence in the government and sparked frustration among communities facing rising costs. The increasing reliance on foreign lenders highlighted how economic challenges had become intertwined with political vulnerability. Efforts to modernize transportation and industry led to the construction of railways and new factories. These projects aimed to improve movement of goods, strengthen trade networks, and reduce travel times across the empire. Railways connected distant provinces to major cities, encouraging economic growth and easier administration. The development of factories provided new jobs and supported domestic production. However, these improvements required significant funding and oversight, which added pressure to an already strained system. Despite challenges, the projects demonstrated a commitment to adapting the empire to the demands of a changing world. Reforms intended to limit the power of older elites caused friction across administrative levels. These elites had long controlled local matters and resisted changes that reduced their influence. Reformers believed that reducing their power would promote fairness and improve efficiency. The struggle between traditional authority and modern governance created a contested environment where progress often moved slowly. Some regions improved under new guidelines, while others faced repeated conflicts over leadership and control. This push to reshape authority structures highlighted the depth of resistance to modernization and the complexity of governing such a diverse empire. The empire struggled to maintain loyalty across regions as reforms continued. Some communities feared losing their cultural identity, while others felt neglected by central authorities. Rebellions and local disputes required military attention, diverting resources from modernization projects. Administrators attempted to reassure populations through negotiations, tax adjustments, and local improvements, but unrest continued in various areas. The ongoing instability underscored how difficult it had become to keep distant provinces aligned with the central government. The empire's vast geography made it even harder to address concerns quickly, widening the gap between the capital and the frontier. A push toward constitutional governance emerged as reformers sought a more structured political system. They believed that establishing a constitution would clarify rights, define leadership responsibilities, and reduce the potential for abuse of power. Advocates argued that constitutional rule could unite the empire by creating predictable processes that everyone understood. Opponents worried that such changes would weaken the Sultan's authority and disrupt established traditions. The debate over constitutional reform revealed growing ideological divides, but it also reflected a desire to modernize governance in a way that could stabilize the empire during turbulent times. Sultans during this late period faced intense pressure as internal and external challenges increased. Some attempted reforms but struggled to balance competing demands from military leaders, regional powers, and foreign interests. Their leadership often lacked consistency, and the empire suffered from frequent policy shifts. These difficulties weakened confidence among administrators and citizens alike. The strain of maintaining control across such a large territory became increasingly evident. Each new issue exposed deeper structural problems that required strong leadership to resolve. The empire's stability depended on decisions made during a period marked by constant uncertainty. Reformists and traditionalists engaged in repeated disputes over the direction of the empire. Reformists pushed for updated systems, expanded rights, and modern institutions, believing these changes essential for survival. Traditionalists feared that rapid reforms would erode cultural foundations and disrupt daily life. This ongoing conflict slowed progress and created divisions across government offices. Military leaders, administrators, and local officials found themselves caught between opposing viewpoints. The discord made it difficult to implement consistent policies, leaving the empire vulnerable to outside threats. The inability to unite behind a shared vision added further strain to an already fragile structure. Educated urban groups gained influence as literacy and access to new ideas increased. Newspapers, schools, and social organizations allowed these groups to discuss political issues and share opinions widely. Many supported modernization and believed that stronger institutions could restore the empire's stability. Their growing voice challenged older power structures and pushed for more participation in governance. This shift changed the social landscape, creating new centers of influence that did not rely on traditional positions. Their involvement signaled an important change in how decisions would be shaped in the coming years as political awareness continued spreading. Independence movements spread across several regions as communities sought control over their own affairs. National identity grew stronger in areas with distinct cultures, languages, or histories. Leaders of these movements organized groups, distributed messages, and rallied support for autonomy. The empire struggled to respond effectively, as each movement required attention while resources were already stretched thin. Some regions engaged in negotiations while others resisted more forcefully. These movements gradually reduced Ottoman influence across large territories, signaling a shift in the balance of power within the empire. The rise of nationalism became one of the defining forces of this era. Territorial losses mounted as wars and uprisings reduced Ottoman control across Europe, North Africa, and parts of the Middle East. Each defeat weakened the empire's strategic position and reduced access to important trade routes. Military setbacks further exposed structural weaknesses that had accumulated over generations. Diplomats attempted to negotiate favorable terms, but foreign powers often gained advantages through agreements and treaties. The shrinking borders revealed how much the empire had changed from its peak. These losses forced leaders to reconsider priorities and confront the reality that the empire was no longer capable of maintaining its former reach. Financial instability grew worse, as the empire lost access to valuable regions that once supported the treasury. Revenue from trade declined, and border provinces struggled to provide consistent income due to conflict and unrest. Leaders attempted new tax policies, but resistance increased as communities felt overwhelmed by demands they could no longer meet. Military spending remained high, and shortages affected both the army and the civilian population. The shrinking economy limited the government's ability to respond to crises, accelerating the decline. Officials recognized that without major changes, the empire's remaining structure could weaken beyond repair. Key military defeats further reduced Ottoman influence, revealing gaps in training, equipment, and leadership. Rivals who once feared Ottoman strength now saw opportunities to expand at the empire's expense. Losses on battlefields damaged morale and encouraged more regions to question central authority. Leaders struggled to rebuild units quickly enough to defend remaining territories. These defeats made it clear that older methods could not withstand organized and well-equipped opponents. Each setback left the empire more vulnerable, and recovering from them became increasingly difficult as resources dwindled and internal divisions grew stronger. The Young Turk movement gained momentum as reform-minded groups demanded stronger leadership and modern institutions. These individuals believed that only dramatic changes could save the empire from complete collapse. They organized meetings, spread their ideas through newspapers, and built support among students, soldiers, and professionals. Their message called for a government that operated transparently and placed national interests above palace politics. As their influence grew, pressure increased on the Sultan to accept reforms. The movement signaled a shift in political power as traditional structures faced a challenge unlike anything the empire had experienced before. Sultans attempted to adapt to the changing political climate, but their authority weakened as new groups gained influence. They approved some reforms to ease tensions, but struggled to balance internal pressure with demands from foreign powers. This instability made decisive leadership difficult. Competing interests slowed progress and created confusion among administrators responsible for implementing new systems. People across the empire sensed that the traditional structure no longer met the challenges of the era. The Sultan's diminishing authority showed how much political dynamics had shifted, opening the door for movements seeking major transformation. Mehmed V assumed leadership during a period filled with rising tension and rapid changes. He inherited an empire facing internal conflict, territorial losses, and growing involvement from foreign powers. Although he sought stability, events unfolded faster than his administration could manage. New national movements expanded within the empire, and rival states prepared for potential conflict in Europe. Mehmed V's reign became defined by constant pressure, as decisions carried consequences that affected millions. The atmosphere around his rule revealed how difficult it had become for any leader to steer the empire through such complex challenges. As global tensions escalated, the empire formed alliances that leaders hoped would improve its position. Advisors believed that supporting powerful partners could help regain lost territory or strengthen defenses. These alliances carried significant risks because they tied the empire's fate to the outcome of larger conflicts. Nevertheless, many believed the decision was necessary to avoid isolation. The empire prepared for war, knowing that its resources were limited. The decision reflected a mixture of hope and desperation, as leaders sought a path that could reshape declining fortunes in a rapidly changing world. The strategic goal entering World War I focused on regaining strength through coordinated military action with allied powers. Leaders believed that if key victories were achieved, the empire might recover regions lost in earlier conflicts. However, the military lacked the equipment and organization required for sustained operations. Several fronts opened at once, stretching forces across vast distances. Commanders struggled to supply troops and maintain communication under harsh conditions. The empire entered the conflict with determination, but the immense demands of modern warfare exposed vulnerabilities that earlier reform efforts had not fully resolved. Early battles during World War I drained manpower and further strained the empire's limited resources. Soldiers marched across difficult terrain with inadequate supplies, facing opponents with stronger artillery and better coordination. Some initial defensive successes offered hope, but they came at significant cost. The lack of reinforcements and modern equipment weakened the ability to sustain progress. Losses mounted and regions that relied on Ottoman protection faced increasing danger. The war highlighted the widening gap between the empire's military capacity and the requirements of modern combat, making recovery increasingly unlikely. Internal divisions intensified during the war as different regions faced shortages and uncertainty. Communities experienced rising hardships due to disrupted trade routes and reduced agricultural production. Some groups blamed the central government for choosing alliances that brought conflict closer to their homes. These frustrations deepened long-standing tensions between ethnic and cultural communities across the empire. The government attempted relief efforts, but limited resources and poor coordination minimized their impact. The strain of wartime conditions made it harder to maintain unity, exposing the fragility of a system already weakened by decades of instability. As the war continued, the empire struggled to maintain control over distant provinces. Communication delays and supply shortages weakened the administrative grip in areas once governed with confidence. Rival powers advanced into territories left vulnerable by stretched forces. Local leaders faced impossible decisions between resisting foreign occupation or preserving their communities by negotiating with advancing armies. The central government recognized that its authority was slipping, but lacked the means to restore stability. Each lost province further weakened the empire's strategic position, accelerating the pace of decline during a conflict it could no longer manage effectively. Foreign occupation loomed over key regions as rival armies approached major population centers. Cities that had been part of the empire for centuries now faced the threat of control by outside forces. Diplomats attempted to negotiate terms to protect civilians, but the empire's weakened position limited what could be secured. Occupation disrupted daily life, damaged trade, and allowed foreign powers to shape outcomes that favored their interests. The arrival of outside forces signaled how much the empire had lost since its height. The pressure created an environment where major political changes became unavoidable. The combined weight of internal conflict, foreign invasion, and wartime exhaustion left the empire vulnerable to collapse. Leaders faced urgent decisions as territory after territory fell out of their grasp. The central government attempted to reorganize defenses, but shortages made coordinated action nearly impossible. Regions once critical to the empire's identity now faced uncertain futures under advancing powers. The rapid unraveling of control showed how much damage decades of decline had caused. Many understood that the empire could not continue without a fundamental shift in leadership and purpose. Treaties imposed after the war formally divided many of the empire's remaining lands among victorious powers. These agreements restricted military forces, reduced territorial claims, and placed regions under foreign administration. The harsh terms shocked the population and angered groups who believed the empire had been unfairly targeted. The treaties left little room for recovery and revealed how deeply the empire had fallen in global standing. These restrictions weakened the government further, pushing leaders to reconsider the future of the state. The loss of control highlighted the urgent need for a new direction. The aftermath of the war inspired movements determined to reclaim control over lands within Anatolia. Local leaders organized resistance groups focused on protecting towns from foreign occupation. These efforts gained support from officers, citizens, and communities afraid of losing their identity. The resistance movements coordinated their strategies, sharing intelligence and securing supplies where possible. Their determination created a sense of unity in regions that had suffered from years of instability. The growing strength of these movements challenged both foreign forces and the weakened Ottoman government, setting the stage for dramatic change. As resistance efforts expanded, new leaders emerged who aimed to build a political system capable of protecting Anatolia's future. They believed that the empire's old structure could not survive in the modern world, and that a fresh foundation was needed. These leaders organized assemblies, gathered support from rural and urban communities, and formed groups capable of challenging foreign authority. Their work created a parallel source of leadership that operated with increasing confidence. The momentum grew as more people placed their hopes in this emerging movement, believing it could offer a new path forward. Efforts to remove foreign influence intensified as resistance groups coordinated campaigns against occupying forces. They focused on reclaiming towns, securing supply routes, and forming local administrations that operated independently of foreign control. Their organized actions gained momentum across regions of Anatolia. Each successful pushback strengthened morale and encouraged more communities to participate. These coordinated efforts signaled that the population was no longer willing to accept decisions made by outside powers. The growing success of these campaigns pushed the empire closer to a breaking point, as traditional leadership struggled to maintain relevance. As the resistance gained strength, the authority of the Ottoman government faded. The Sultan still held his position in name, but meaningful control slipped away as new leadership structures spread across Anatolia. Officials loyal to the empire struggled to enforce orders that lacked popular support. The empire's inability to secure its own capital revealed the extent of its weakened state. People increasingly looked toward the emerging movement for guidance and stability. The fading authority of the old system marked a turning point that made a return to previous governance almost impossible. Growing pressure from both internal and external forces made it clear that the Sultanate could no longer function effectively. Leaders of the new movement argued that the empire needed a government rooted in national will rather than inherited authority. They pushed for the creation of assemblies that represented communities across Anatolia. These new structures gained legitimacy through their ability to provide protection and organization. As more regions joined the movement, the influence of the Sultan shrank until his role became symbolic rather than practical. Calls for a complete political transformation gained overwhelming support. The decision to end the Sultanate came after extensive debate and recognition that the traditional system could not meet modern demands. Leaders supporting change viewed the move as essential for establishing a stable future free from foreign interference. The announcement carried emotional weight, as it marked the end of a structure that had existed for centuries. Despite the historical significance, many accepted the necessity of the decision. The empire's decline had shown that the old framework could no longer protect the population. Ending the sultanate cleared the path for a new political foundation. The last sultan departed under significant pressure, leaving behind a palace that had once symbolized immense power. His exit marked a profound shift in identity for the population, who now faced the challenge of building a government from the ground up. The departure removed any remaining connection to the empire's previous form. For many, it represented both relief and uncertainty. Without the sultan, the region entered a period of transition where new leaders needed to define principles that would shape the future. The moment carried a sense of finality that signaled true closure for the Ottoman era. With the sultanate abolished, leaders moved quickly to establish a new political order designed for stability and national unity. They drafted structures that assigned authority to elected representatives and formalized the role of assemblies already operating across Anatolia. These systems aimed to create accountability and prevent the concentration of power that had contributed to the empire's decline. The new framework focused on protecting citizens' interests and rebuilding institutions damaged by years of conflict. The transition was challenging, but it marked the beginning of a government shaped by collective decision-making rather than inherited rule. A new government structure took shape as leaders put their plans into action. They formed councils responsible for lawmaking, defense, and economic planning. These councils worked to rebuild infrastructure, re-establish trade connections, and strengthen communication across regions. Communities participated in selecting representatives, creating a sense of involvement that differed from the empire's previous system. This new political environment encouraged cooperation and participation, helping restore confidence among people who had endured years of instability. The government's early efforts demonstrated its commitment to forming a stable and inclusive foundation. The declaration of the Republic of Turkey marked the official end of the Ottoman Empire and the beginning of a new national identity. This moment represented the culmination of years of struggle, sacrifice, and determination. The Republic's leaders emphasized unity, modernization, and self-governance as guiding principles. Schools, laws, and institutions were reorganized to reflect this new direction. Citizens experienced a dramatic shift from imperial rule to a system focused on collective progress. The transformation symbolized rebirth, offering hope for a stronger and more resilient nation that could define its own future. Reflecting on the transformation, many recognized how the actions of each sultan had shaped the empire's rise and decline. From Osman's small frontier group to the global power built by centuries of leadership, the empire had experienced both extraordinary achievements and deep challenges. The final years revealed how outdated systems, internal divisions, and relentless external pressure had exceeded the empire's ability to adapt. Yet the legacy of its accomplishments continued to influence culture, architecture, and history across vast regions. The empire's long journey left a complex record that defined eras far beyond its borders. The story of the Ottoman Empire's rise and collapse provides a clear view of how leadership, ambition, unity, and conflict shaped one of history's longest-lasting powers. Each sultan influenced the direction of the state, creating foundations that allowed expansion and decisions that contributed to decline. The final shift to the Republic of Turkey closed a chapter that had lasted centuries, leaving future generations to interpret the lessons of both strength and weakness. The end of the empire marked not just a political change, but the completion of a journey that reshaped regions, cultures, and the course of world history.